Yeah, okay.
All right,
All
we're
right.
almost ready to start. Mike, is that about?
Yep, I was going to suggest that we get rolling right now.
Yeah, um, so today we are talking about the secret downfall of a remote workforce. And I think, certainly within the realm of the COVID quarantine area, we have Mike Malatesta from our Delafield, as we were chatting about. That's a suburb of Milwaukee. So we have Wisconsin, and then MotherG is headquartered in Itasca, which is in Illinois. So we have kind of the dichotomy of two different worlds. Having been in Wisconsin quite a bit, I call it the Wild West right now because there's no forced quarantining, there's no forced masks. It's more voluntary or by business. So it's an interesting dichotomy as we explore this idea of a remote workforce, and I think it should be an interesting conversation. What we're hoping is to shed light on the idea that maybe there are some underlying issues within that remote workforce. Some people have jumped on the bandwagon saying, hey, this is great, and we're going to cut office space, and it's a lot easier for the employees. And I know a lot of employees initially were excited to be in that model of working remote. So, we're going to explore some of those ideas. But before we jump into that, I'd like to introduce ourselves. I'll introduce myself, and I'll ask Mike to introduce himself. My name is Dave Davenport. I am the CEO of MotherG. We're a technology outsourcing firm, a managed service provider. And really our goal is to help organizations become much more productive through the use of technology. So making their businesses really be titans of industry and helping them do that through excellent technology. And we help a lot of different industries across primarily Chicago, Milwaukee markets, headquartered there. We serve clients nationally, but really we're looking for primarily their prime location to be in Chicago, Milwaukee. Mike, a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, Dave, thanks so much for inviting me to participate today. And hello, everyone who's joining. I'm Mike Malatesta. I'm the leader at ERC Midwest. We are a industrial waste recycling and disposal firm that primarily works with manufacturers to solve what we call complex waste problems. So we do pretty much everything but the trash. I am an entrepreneur. This is the second company in this industry that I've been involved in starting. The first was Advanced Waste Services, which I started in 1992. I also am a podcast host. The How Did It Happen podcast is my show. And I'm friends with Joe, and that's kind of how I got connected with the folks at MotherG.
Yeah, Joe Skitarzak is our general manager for Wisconsin. So Joe introduced me to Mike, and off we go. Mike's got a really interesting background, which I would encourage you to listen to his podcast. It's a very interesting podcast, and has, as he mentioned here, invested in over 40 companies in a variety of fields. So it has a great deal of business acumen and perspective. So I'm looking forward to this topic. So one of the things, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but if you're interested in exploring any of these topics further, or if you're interested in looking at the technology landscape of your organization, we're very willing to have a business roadmap review with you at any time. Contact me through my email. So let's jump right in. Let's talk about the pros of a remote workforce. And, I think some of these are fairly obvious now. Certainly, when we sent our workers home through the COVID crisis, initially in Wisconsin, then they came back, I think everyone had the experience, at least for a couple months, of what it was like to quarantine. And, the initial reaction was overall, I think, relatively positive by most organizations. Once they got their technology issues worked out and kind of set up their workspace, we see, you don't have a commute. There's fewer distractions. You don't have the guy leaning over your cube, bugging you in the middle of the day while you're in the middle of trying to, do your job, program a new piece for the CNC machine or whatever. Your lunch is right down the hall in the fridge. And certainly we've seen, a lot of benefits for Mike Vizo, our director of marketing, is a recent parent. So having that flexibility to work from home when it benefits the family can really be a benefit. And I think, we also see organizationally this idea that organizations can reduce office space potentially by having some portion of their workforce working from their home, so they don't need to spend that high rent. And that's been kind of a historical thing, certainly well before COVID. People have experimented with this idea of flexible work locations and remote workforces. Certainly, this idea of a larger talent pool, if we're available to work from home, then home in a much more geographically dispersed target pool. We actually have employees that do not live in the Chicago or Milwaukee metro areas, but actually live in Denver and other locations, and they're very productive in working with the organization with MotherG. Mike, any thoughts you have on this from your perspective?
Yeah, I think, at the very beginning, I don't know that there was anyone out there who wasn't scared about what this was going to be. When you can't bring people into your office anymore, and that's been sort of your culture, there's a control component to that feels pretty good, or you've learned it to feel pretty good about it. And having everyone sort of leave the nest and be expected to work and be as productive. I thought I was scared of that, I have to say. And
yeah.
I think most of us probably were. But the kind of the amazing thing is when humans are really good at, when you don't have a choice, making something work. It's something. So it's been amazing. Right? It's been amazing what companies and people and everyone has pulled together to make work when we had to.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the way you are able to inherently the employees adjust to this new model, I thought was really great. And people, I have a number of examples of the productivity actually increasing, at least in the short term, by people embracing this change and jumping into it. And I think you're right, Mike. I mean, people adapt, right? They find the way to overcome the challenges and make it work for them.
Right. Yeah, they like the challenge brings out the best in them, and so does fear sometimes. When you're looking at what's happening to so many other companies and laying people off and stuff, the fact that you still have a job and can work from home is a motivator.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. So let's, and by the way, for everyone on the webinar, please use your chat function to field any thoughts or questions as we're going through the discussion. And at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A and discussion, and you can unmute yourself and weigh in with a thought or a question, or send it through chat, and Mike will field it for us. So let's talk about some of the cons of the remote workforce, some of the things that might be hindering success. One thing that I think clearly does not happen, at least as much as it does when we're kind of working together in an office space, is we don't have as much spontaneous communication. We don't have the conversations that happen accidentally or casually as we're wandering the office. And I think that's a really big thing that I see notably in our business of IT, where the challenges are myriad and complex, and we don't always necessarily, there's no such thing as one right answer, where there's multiple possible ideas. that kind of spontaneous communication. If I, we see this on our help desk. If I'm sitting on the phone talking to a client with a problem, and one of my coworkers who's not on the phone happens to overhear and has a thought, they can interject while I'm working on it and say, "Hey, did you check their, DNS setting or something?" And that can launch me into a much faster resolution by bringing up the idea. And I think that's a really, really important aspect.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't know how many times I have a thought now or had a thought while more of us were working remotely, and I would have definitely acted on that thought to get an opinion or run something by someone. But then I thought, geez, am I really going to bother them with this now, where ordinarily I wouldn't even have thought twice about it.
Yeah, right. I think this other thought too is this work-life balance. Initially we saw huge productivity come about with our team. Certainly we were inundated with requests for work from home, so our business was really busy. The team really stepped up. But we had examples where some of the employees were trying to work from home, but their children were home with them, and it was very difficult for them to balance those distractions in dealing with that, and not having their own workspace set up like their cube at the office, the inability to kind of get away from the home and go to the office, and then vice versa. The idea of getting away from the office to go back home, if it's all in the same location, it's really hard to find that balance. And we found a lot of struggles there.
Yeah, I mean, when you're not set up to work from home for more than, say, a half an hour a day when you're answering emails or something, that's one thing. But when you have to, dedicate focus, you need a space that works. And I'm sure there were a lot of challenges for people, and still are, trying to, establish that space that, there's a reason people go to work, and it's to get away from all that other stuff.
Right. I mean, it's a time to focus. And what I noticed when I worked from home is I really missed that time of transition, and that was my commute. I have about a 20 to 30 minute commute to the office. And when I leave home, I kind of start going into work mode, and I start thinking about what I want to accomplish in the day. And I start that commute. And by the time I get to work, I'm raring to get in that door and, get my cup of coffee and get down to it. When I would walk down the stairs and go into my office, 10 feet away, it took me a while to get into that mode. And the flip side was also true. It was really hard to get out of that mode. And I shared, that idea with some of my clients, and they felt very much the same way. It was very hard for them to leave the office and to break away, a lot of burnout.
Yeah. I think one of the other potential cons too, it's really a blessing to be able to work from home. And I think that kind of gets maybe a little bit lost in the discussion of this, because the people, like in our business, we've got, way more than half of the people, we need them to be driving a truck, or we need them to be servicing our clients. We need them to be working in our plants. They don't have an option to, work from home.
Right.
And there's sort of the con of, does it create a dichotomy in your workforce?
Yes.
Certain people,
Schism.
Right. Yeah, right. They can work at home and, take care of their kids especially when schools are closed and all. And then you've got all these other people who just can't do that and have to make it work some other way. And I feel like it's a delicate thing to manage, because you can easily lose control of, we're all one team. We're all working for the same goals.
I think that's a good point too. I hadn't thought of it, but it does create potentially, another aspect of, the have and have not in one regard or another. And I think it cuts both ways. We saw that where, we've had to force some people to stay at home. And I've heard some of my clients voice the same thing, that they've required some people to stay home, and those people didn't react positively to that. They
Right.
did not want to work from home, to the point that one organization I'm aware of, they had to request that one of their employees go on FMLA, family leave, through the quarantine, because of, the circumstances of working from home were so difficult for the employee. So I think that's, this other idea too, we've, and I've heard other organizations bring this up as well, but we hired an employee in the middle of, actually 2 employees in the middle of quarantine. And one actually worked in our office and another one worked remotely. And it really raised the question, how do these people become familiar with what our culture is? Because a lot of the culture comes out through the interaction with the fellow workers. And if you're now working remote, you don't have that indoctrination that occurs somewhat naturally when we're working together in the office. It's much more difficult when you have these stilted sort of video sessions or, conversations with your boss.
Yeah, or just the little welcome party, or the little things, little balloons around your office or your cubicle, or just those kinds of things that I suppose you can send somebody a fancy email or something that, pops balloons, but it's not the same.
Right. Yeah. I see here, John from Transtech brings up that they found a new tool in LinkedIn for recruiting purposes. And after they were throwing ideas around the searches, they discovered a new capability that would have never been found if they were doing a video conference or, working remotely. So this was after they had come back into the office after the quarantine. Just a good example of that kind of freedom of communication that happens when you have that spontaneous sort of accidental creativity that we're going to talk about next. The last thing here, and I'll touch on it, is that people really are social animals. They want to be with other people. Now, even introverts, and I'm married to somewhat of an introvert, and even introverts want to be around other people and see value. And so I think this idea of being quarantined at home, you tend to work family, and I know a lot of organizations have a really strong culture, and their coworkers really enjoy working with each other. And when you take that away, it takes away something from being an employee of that business.
Yeah. Well, I'm a big time introvert myself, Dave, and I can tell you that I like the peace and quiet that comes from working by myself, but I don't like being in the same place all the time. I like to move, and of course everybody gets energy from interacting with other people, even if you only do it in small doses, like what works for me.
Right. Yeah. But, I think that's important. I just heard a guy on the news yesterday talking about introverts and extroverts in working remotely versus not. It was actually John Cleese. And he was talking about that being an introvert, generally, one study he read was that introverts have a lot going on in their mind. And so they have a lot of ideas that they're processing at the same time, and being around other people creates anxiety almost, because now I have these inner ideas and I have these exterior interactions, and it's hard to balance that, versus extroverts who tend to think by interaction and have more creativity by interacting with others. And it was a really interesting perspective. But even John Cleese said, it's important though, on occasions, he wants to be around other people. And it sounds like you're saying the same thing, just maybe not as much as what an extrovert would want to be.
Yeah. Like you'd think that working from home or working completely by myself would be the ideal thing. And I'd say for 60 or 70% of the time, it probably is.
Yeah.
But the other, 30 or 40% is pretty darn important for me as a human being.
Yeah. So let's talk about kind of the secret issue behind, or the hidden issue behind this work from home. We call it organizational rust. Rust is the sort of hidden killer of a car. We don't have it anymore, but people that are my age, maybe yours, Mike, I don't know, remember when cars used to rust out, and we would have a lot of preventive measures to try and prevent rusting in vehicles and whatnot. But the thing is, it's a kind of a hidden killer, right? You don't know, once you notice the rust, it's almost too late.
Yeah, right. It's good. Right. Yep. It's like
Right?
cancer. Once you discover it, boy.
Yeah. Yeah. You really want it. So as much as possible, we want to prevent the rust from happening in the first place. And I think there's almost an overconfidence in this, hey, we worked from home and productivity hasn't suffered, and everything's going along fine. Let's rush to reduce our rent because there's a huge cost in that, and save some money and give this benefit to the employees. And I think you really want to tap the brakes on that idea for a number of reasons that we'll talk about right now. I think there's a lot of intangibles that make organizations successful, and they don't come out in the explicit job roles, but more in the implied things that happen between the lines. And what I mean by that is, so for example, we were talking about the casual conversations. You don't have a casual conversation at the coffee pot when you're working from home. You may call a coworker to have a conversation about a topic that you need to discuss, but the casual side of that tends to be much more limited.
Yeah.
And you don't have the accidental conversations that lead, and this is something that Steve Jobs talked a lot about why he was an opponent of the work from home model, is that you don't have accidental creativity where you're standing there talking about a problem or a challenge, and a coworker walks up, overhears what you're talking about, and says, "Oh, it's funny you bring that up. I also had that issue." And you start kind of in this ad hoc brainstorm and coming up with ideas and solutions. And so many of the innovations that we've come up with at MotherG have been through the casual, unexpected interactions, not through a very deliberative brainstorming model.
Yeah, I think as you were saying that, I was thinking, not everything of value comes through the internet, right?
Yeah, right.
You can sit in front of a computer all day long, but you can find out lots of stuff, but you have to search for what you're looking for. And what you're describing is someone who that's sort of comes along. You're not looking for it; it comes
Right,
along, and it's like, who knew?
Yeah, right. I think there's also this sense of kind of loss in culture that happens. And, I think, we certainly have a lot of office shenanigans. When everyone's in the office, you walk through our space here and you'll find a lot of Nerf bullets laying around because, the guys will have a spontaneous Nerf gun fight, or, and yes, that's a productivity loss because they're not working on a problem if they're shooting a Nerf gun, but it's also something fun and interaction, and it blows off steam. And when they get back to work, they're much more productive when they get back to work. And that kind of fun attitude of working together kind of gets lost.
Yeah. I look at that and I say, well, look, anybody can connect with anybody else for an hour over a Zoom call, and you can come away with it and you think, okay, that was a good connection, right?
Right.
But the difference between that and working, side by side or close to someone or on a team with someone live and in person, I feel like, that's where you figure out whether you have the right people or not whether they can.
Absolutely. I mean, when I'm here in the office with everyone out there, and I walk to get a cup of coffee, I walk right through, a couple of different departments of people, and I'm saying hi to them. I'm asking how it's going. I can pick up the vibe for whether things are going well or whether we've got a problem just by walking through there. I don't need to intentionally go open up my dashboard and start looking at some of the KPIs to figure out if we've got issues. I can just walk through there and I can immediately, offer to lend a hand, or at least just cheer them on and say, good job, guys. Let me know if you need anything, and buy them lunch, and, kind of pop some of the pressure that people are feeling and get them back to that productivity where I never see any of that if they're remote.
Yeah. And you can also just listen, you know, you don't have to say anything. You listen, and your experience, you know, can help you just, you know, understand the vibe and whatever, just by being there, not saying, not even if you don't have to say a word.
Right. And I think that example that John brought up from Transtech, where, you know, they had ideas throwing around because they were kind of listening to each other, and they found a really cool tool by exploring LinkedIn and some of the features that they would not have gone to if they were working over a Zoom or just working on their own.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of spontaneous creativity that I think gets lost. This is a really important thing. And again, you know, our business is acutely sensitive to this in the skills development, and certainly mentoring and training both new employees as well as senior people. And that is that, you know, technology is really complicated and there's a lot of different aspects to it. You don't know everything. And it's, you know, we can have somebody who's working on a problem. If they're in the office, it's very easy to say, does anybody have any ideas? Has anybody ever seen this before? And three other people may pop their head up and say, oh yeah, you know, look at this or look at that, or here's a wiki, or, you know, here's something that we did, you know, last time to fix that problem. If you're working from home, you can try and do that through our collaboration tools. And trust me, we've got a lot of collaboration tools that make it easier than probably most organizations to do that, but you're still typing, or you're still trying to intentionally reach out to one or two individuals rather than just kind of that sort of spontaneous, hey, can I get help? And the flip side of that as well is it's much more difficult for a manager to observe the performance of an employee when they're remote. Again, we have a lot of KPIs, we can measure things, we can check in, but I can't observe. I can't just watch and listen, as you say. I think that's really key in developing people.
I agree. I you know, you brought on a couple of people. I think we brought on some people, but in jobs where we could still train them, jobs where they, you know, have to show up. There are some positions that I don't know how, even if you had the greatest training manual in the world, I don't know how you would do a good job of bringing on a new person and training them if it was all remote. That's right. That's a challenge.
I mean, when you're serving customers, you know, you can tell people what to do and you can tell them how to do it. And you can train them on those things. But some of the subtleties of intention, of tonality and voice, of how to engage people, in measuring whether somebody is well suited for, you know, job A versus job B is really hard to do remote. I just think this is the part where in the short term, you know, this work from remote, you know, work from home model, you know, can appear to be really productive. But I think if you're not reinforcing these core cultural underlying aspects of your organization, you're going to have that rust. You're going to have degradation in how the organization performs.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you know, we're sort of biased, right? We're biased towards the decisions that we make. We want them to work. So we've made this decision to have a lot of people work from home. It's a decision that we maybe were forced to make, but we want it to work. And so, you know, that always brings into sort of question in my mind is how honest are we being with ourselves as to how well it's working? And the same question could be for, you know, having people in the office all the time. It's, you know, you've made that decision. And so you think that decision is the right, and you're going to say that it works best. And here are the reasons why. So we're really.
Well, we find evidence, right? We look for evidence to validate our decision rather than evaluating all the information and trying to assess whether the evidence is really pointing to support that or whether there's any kind of contracting or directionally different perspectives, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard so many business owners, you know, point to the KPIs and the justifications for why this is working and why they might continue it. But prior to this, I never heard them talking about those same things when they had everybody in the office. So that makes me think like, okay, I feel like I need to justify my decision-making on this, and here's how I'm going to do it. And maybe
Yeah.
it's right, maybe it's not, I don't know. But it's just,
I know I have a friend whose job is and will always be 100% remote. Their corporate headquarters is in Orange County, California, with a large operation in Phoenix, and he lives in Chicago, and he travels a lot. So
right.
I think by design, there are some jobs that are always remote.
Of course, always have been, yeah.
That's fine, but I think, you have to be very discerning about which jobs are going to be appropriate to be a remote and which jobs should arguably be interactive and present in an office.
Yeah. And or what do you want your company to actually be? Do you want a distributed company, that's
right,
where, like you said, you can get talent from all over the world to work with you on your team, and you don't have to have any physical space. That's a business model that could work for a lot of people.
Yeah. And I think it depends on the job, right? I mean,
yeah.
I think, some jobs are just highly technical, and the cultural aspect of what you're really looking for may not be as important to what the job is. And, I think of, certain, technical job, maybe an engineer in a building construction that's going to test stress levels of a design. That might be something that you could use a remote workforce for, whether it's in the suburbs of Chicago or whether it's in the suburbs of Delhi. You might be able to outsource some of those things. So I think being very intentional about those things is really key. I've seen a study that said that the ideal amount of time of work from home versus working in an office is around 8 to 16 hours a week of remote, and the remainder of it being present in an office. And the idea being that you have enough time alone. And I think this is kind of where you were going, Mike, where you like to be really focused and uninterrupted. I know my COO, Philippe Schmidt, enjoys working from home 1 or 2 days a week for that very reason. When he has a lot of development or a lot of thinking and that kind of work, he's really benefits a lot from that focused time. And I can attest as well. I know that works for me. I'm probably more the 8 hours a week because I really get a lot out of being with my team and interacting with them. But I think, what we're saying, and we hear it from you, who's a touted introvert, and I'm more of an extrovert. We do have value in being focused and working from home, but we also get a lot of value out of that interaction. And I think that's really kind of the key here, right? So before we open up for Q&A, and I know we've got a couple of comments that are coming through chat, I just wanted to mention again, if you're curious about how to get more out of the technology, productivity, and make your business more effective in what you're trying to achieve, MotherG is always available for a business roadmap review. Just reach out to me directly. Happy to help you. And Mike, you got a great podcast. I'll give you a minute to tout your organization as well as your podcast.
Yeah, sure. So my podcast is called How Did It Happen, as you can see on the screen. And I have conversations with high performers, and I ask them how it happened for them. And then they tell me their story. And then we take their story and we create a path that, is really a journey through the challenges and the opportunities and the wins, the losses, everything. And what I'm trying to do is give great value to other high performers, because everybody wants to learn from one another, which is another reason why it's good to get together.
Right.
But also, my second goal with the podcast is to inspire people who want maybe something more from their life, but are challenged by something on getting there. And if I can show people that people they look up to now, who they consider to be successful or more successful than them, we're in their shoes at some point in their life, then maybe that opens the door or knocks down the wall or gives them the confidence or whatever you want to say to explore what they really want to become.
Yeah,
Um,
it's really a well done podcast too. I can attest, Mike.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm curious for people to weigh in on their experiences. If you want to unmute and ask, feel free. I know we do have one topic that I want to mention that Mike Vizo brings up, that 40% of the registrants of these webinars were considering either considering or will reduce their workspace as a byproduct of the work from home experience. And so I wonder if any of the participants want to weigh in on that, and if they have any thoughts.
I'll weigh in on it just to kind of get things started. I would say that if you're not considering doing that, which that's been a trend for a long time, people have been trying to really utilize space and not have space for every single employee and that kind of stuff. But if this experience hasn't taught you that you probably don't need every square inch of space that you have, then, you probably have been asleep at the switch. So, now that's a whole different story than we're never going to come back to the office, which is, kind of what we talked about earlier. But
Yeah. I mean, we experimented with hoteling space. I've got some client experiences where they have experienced hoteling space where they've tried to reduce the total space and give people transient locations that are easy for them to plug into when they come to the office. What's funny is what I've read in research, as well as anecdotally in discussions with other people, they don't feel comfortable with that space. They want their picture of their kids on the cubicle wall. They want the little gimcrackery that they've picked up at trade shows and little things that their kids have given them sitting on their desk. And I think there's that sense of culture that you lose if you think this is transient, this is temporary. I don't have to be here. I'm not part of it.
I've only been in a few of those WeWork type spaces, for meetings, and I've always thought the same thing. It's like, is this really where I'm going to do my best work, surrounded by people who are, would otherwise be in a coffee shop? I guess I don't understand. For me, the vibe and the energy, I didn't understand. Now, I suppose if you have a whole wing and you have your own employees in a wing or something, that's a different story. But just showing up and sort of taking a seat somewhere, it's like going to the library or something.
Right.
Dave, we had a comment from the audience. Mary says, our best week of the year was the week of March 3rd, 2 weeks before the lockdown. And they just duplicated that same week, the very first week back in the office. So they're definitely reframing their mindset of the workspace. You can follow that. Best week before lockdown, best week after lockdown, and now they're starting to shift their focus.
Yeah. And I get that, when you go under lockdown, there's a lot of moving parts. It's going to jolt the system, so to say.
Yeah.
But I think it's telling that, across that 3-month period, that, they didn't match their best week, when yet everyone talks about the productivity increases of working from home. And I can say that, operationally, we saw some big weeks of production working remote, but what we also saw was very high stress levels on the team. And I think those stress levels, when you're working from home, are higher because you don't have that team attitude to lean on other people on your organization when you have that workload. It feels like you're alone. And that's kind of what my team voiced.
Yeah, and I also think that the work from home or the remote thing is one thing. This pandemic is another. The pandemic sort of brings everybody together in a way that just working from home outside of a pandemic wouldn't, and you there's a, especially when it comes down to productivity. I mean, just looking now, and it's like, okay, now to have, your dog in your lap while you're on a business call on Zoom, because that's,
Yeah.
that would never be okay if we weren't in a pandemic together.
Right.
If you were working from home before this and you had your dog there, in most cases, I would say that people would be like, lose the dog. This is a business meeting.
Well, and I've seen this where, the somewhat casualness, you're working from home, and I'll mention Mike Vizo, a lot of video Zoom calls with him where he's wearing his pajamas and his slippers, for a business meeting. And it's, I don't necessarily have a problem with that, but I think over time you tend to become kind of complacent, kind of casual about things. And I saw that with potential clients. We had some sales meetings over Zoom in talking to the clients, and you tend to see on one hand can be positive, but a casualness and almost a flippancy to business where you would not have that if you were in the office, I don't think.
Yeah,
we had another message in the chat there. Sorry, that kind of tying into that. Children are becoming a distraction on virtual meetings, which I can also relate to.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, just, again, that's a pandemic thing too, right? I mean, like my kids are older, fortunately, but when the schools close and daycare closes, and you have to have your kids at home, and you have to be home. There's a lot of slack that has to come along with that. I mean, what can you expect from somebody?
My son's 24, and I can't tell you how many business meetings I was in on Zoom when the door would open, and I'm starting now to have a conversation with him, that I'm like, I'm on a call. Get out of here. I know I'm home, but that doesn't mean you can talk to me.
Exactly.
But I just want to ask you one quick question, and he's mouthing it. I'm like, get out of here. I can't tell you how many calls I've been on when little kids come in the background or they're screaming in the background, and the individual I'm talking to is trying to stay focused, but just can't because of the distraction.
I mean, how many phone calls have we had, Dave, where my office is in the basement, and so I have a toddler upstairs, and all you hear is this pitter patter running across the floor, and then a huge boom, and then tears, and you're like, okay, so back to those numbers that we were talking about.
Should I be going upstairs now? Yeah, I think that's clearly the case.
Yeah, very hard.
We had another comment. It says, you identified burnout and lack of social connection as problematic. Have you identified strategies for helping offset those?
Ooh, that's a great question. Burnout is key. We actually I would say about 6-7 weeks into the work from home model, we started sensing burnout on the team. And what we noticed was that what would be normal, we have unlimited PTO, so there's not this sense of build up for days off, so it can be more casual. And yet we're 6 weeks into quarantine, and I think virtually no one on the service delivery team had taken a day off, which is really uncommon across 30 engineers, that in 6 weeks not one person has taken a day off. And we looked at that and said, all right, we need to start instituting some rolling forced, not forced, but strongly suggested time off, notably for the people who were being more stressed. And so we did that, and it helped a lot. Those folks that took some time off didn't really realize just how wound up they were until they were gone from the duties of their job. Even though they weren't really going anywhere, they just didn't have the pressure of work in those days. So that was one thing we did. Mike, have you done anything around burnout or?
We haven't, and I don't think, just the nature of our business, I don't think required it. We're not, we do have some on call, but we're working when our clients are working. It's not like a 24-hour sort of, oh, we've got an IT problem kind of thing. So I think we were able to manage that. I think we were able to manage that fine. I think people were stressed from time to time because it took them longer to do something, or like some of the things we talked about, they weren't able to socialize, or their working from home wasn't the exact right fit for them. But I don't know that we had any real burnout issues,
Yeah.
but
Rick,
Zoom fatigue. Yeah.
Zoom
Rick in the audience says that they have a very strong culture, and they replaced many of their weekly, monthly social events with virtual events. But many people are getting Zoom fatigue. Any other ideas for maintaining culture?
Yeah, I'm familiar with Rick's organization. It's a great company, DMC, that great office space and very social. Very much like MotherG. Very strong interaction across the team. We did something similar where we did weekly happy hours at the end of the week, and they were over Zoom, and initially very well attended, very positive. Towards the latter stages of the quarantine, started becoming a little less interesting, shall we say, a little less engagement. But one of the things that we've tried to do is engage the team in different ways. And so one of the things we did was we hosted a quarantine photo contest. So it's something kind of a played off. We do this annually for people to submit photos, and then we at our holiday party we vote on it and let everyone display their photos. So we did something similar where we asked people to submit photos from quarantine that depicted kind of how their experience in some ways, and then
I can think of
we
two
had a
things.
contest around that.
I can think of two other things, Dave. Sorry to cut you off there, but we did our TED Talks. So we did little mini presentations from various people around the team to talk about a skill or something fun. One of them you guys can actually check out on YouTube. Philippe Schmidt, who you mentioned earlier, our COO, he made a hybrid Peloton and Nordic Trek bike, and then hooked it up to lights, and has this whole cycling experience inside of his garage, which was a pretty cool video.
Basement, but yeah.
That, and then we also did the workout channel, and Microsoft Teams is our collaboration tool. And so each day to promote exercise, since we typically do 3 days a week with personal trainers, with a personal trainer, people would submit videos of them doing the workout of the day. And so that was a good way to get people moving and encourage them to get outside and get some fresh air too.
Yeah, and I think the key is just finding ways for people to collaborate and play off one another. And we had certainly some fun with Photoshop of taking maybe a picture from a Zoom call and photoshopping something or something funny that happened in sharing that in a passive manner. It doesn't always have to be over Zoom, and I think that's the key, Rick, is that if you keep bringing people back to Zoom, it does create fatigue, and they've seen studies that, and it's basically the amount of eye contact people have when they're on Zoom calls that it stresses them out versus when they're sitting there with an individual in person. And so I think, you don't want to push people that may be on Zoom for much of their day for their job to then be on yet another Zoom event. And yet you still need to promote the culture. And so I think there's some things that you can do passively to have people reflect on what it's like to work in your organization that doesn't have to be on Zoom. So like that photo contest or those TED Talks that we did on your quarantine experience. And it's really amazing the creativity that people come up with in those moments. So it's really fun to watch.
Yeah, and I don't think I have a great answer to this, Rick, but I'm a guy that I don't think I ever did a Zoom before this came about. So as I started doing it, I was reluctant, and then I was really intrigued because it's pretty cool. But one of the things that we did that I think made a difference, and we continue to do it today, and it's not an earth-shattering thing, but every work day at 9 o'clock, we have a 5-minute call. And during that 5-minute call, our general manager talks to everybody about, one, how the business is doing, because that's important to everybody, right? We want to maintain jobs. We want to make sure that we are viable. And then he also either does shout outs to people about things that other people wouldn't know about, or he talks about one of our culture structures. One of the things, our success basics, we call them, and he'll talk about what's happening. He'll talk about that success basics and how we're using it in the workplace, or an example of how a person used it. And it's just a way to engage everybody in a way that we hadn't done before. And I think it's better than Slack or some of the others and it's short. It's just a short thing. And hopefully it gets everybody's day started on the right foot. Like, hey, we're all in this together. Let's move ahead today and make it a great day.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point, Mike. We were not communicating super aggressive early on. But we realized that because we weren't in the office together, the sort of more subtle, frequent communications were not occurring. And so we've tried to amp up the amount of communication, again, passive through email and other means, but then also active by not just having, happy hours over Zoom, but some team meetings as well, and making sure that we're checking in with people. So every manager has been trying to check in with everyone on their team individually on a weekly basis, just to say, how are things going? How are you doing?
Right.
In those things. I think that's, again, reinforcement. We did have a question. Will we be sending the slides out? Mike, can you weigh in on that? I don't know how we do that.
Yeah. So following this, we'll send out a survey to just get your feedback, and then there will be a link that will take you to the presentation, which you can download. It'll be a PDF, and then we'll also send you a link for the video, which will be on YouTube. So look out for that by the end of the day, and you can interact with it however you choose, and feel free to share it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mike, again for joining us, and thank you all of the attendees. Again, any questions, any thoughts, anything you want, feel free to email us, and thank you for joining.
Yeah, Dave, Mike, thank you. Everyone that joined, thank you so much for making time for us today.
Bye now.